Right, this is my rehearsal for what's billed to be a night of celebration because the Tories are no longer in power after 14 years of fucking decimating our public services and ruining our health service and all the rest of it. And I don't want to piss on anyone's fireworks, but it's two what I consider to be cautionary pieces. One's quite long, so bear with us, and the second one's not quite so long. The first one is called the Institute for Sexology, and the Institute for Sexology basically opened in 1919 in Berlin, and it was forcibly closed down by the Nazis in 1933. And I'm going to read this in remembrance of primary school teacher Lucy Meadows, who in 2013 took her own life. Teacher Lucy Meadows' privacy was gone soon after her full gender reassignment caught the attention of Richard Littlejohn, who all but demanded her retirement. He isn't only, Littlejohn prattled on, cajoling with thinly veiled incitement, in the wrong body, he's in the wrong job, and he further suggested Miss Meadows stop putting his own selfish needs ahead of the well-being of the children he has taught. Then came the hate mail, word having spread, and Lucy, evidently deemed fair sport by Littlejohn's hounds, was later found dead, poisoned by carbon monoxide. In short, she'd killed herself, and the coroner's dim view of the press was a justified shame on you. Mindful of Lucy Meadows, R.I.P. Let's travel back to a long ago date in Berlin, May 6, 1933, when Germany was a Nazi-run state and when the Institute for Sexology was trashed, and the staff, all forced to vacate, were, for the most part, imprisoned or killed, and the vacancies, Nazi officialdom filled. The Institute for Sexology would today be over a century old if it hadn't been looted and closed for good, and research was left to continue, unfold, hence destigmatising misunderstood subjects otherwise illicitly sold, kept under wraps and perused with caution. Homosexuality, abortion, gender and feminism were nigh hated, deemed ungermanic, unworthy, uncouth, and, let's face it can't be overstated, the same rules applied most everywhere. In truth, minorities were, in the main, ill-fated, and the wrath of radicalised Volkish youth unleashed in Berlin on that late spring day had long before then been simmering away. The Institute, founded in 1919, was the brainchild of a German physician, Magnus Hirschfeld, who for many years had been an advocate for gender transition and rights for the gay and transgender scene, a brave and undoubtedly hazardous mission, though the Weimar Republic government gave him concessions, if not full consent. But alas, in line with the times, Magnus Hirschfeld was often a target for hard right hatred. One night, he was almost fatally quelled by a mob who beat him and left him for dead, and when it transpired he'd survived being felled, the disappointment could even be read in rags, whose journalists had plenty to say about Magnus Hirschfeld, both Jewish and gay. The Institute lays claim to the first ever full gender reassignment, there performed on Dora Richter, who'd once tried to sever her penis, perhaps upon feeling malformed at merely 6 years of age, though whether or not those early childhood feelings were formed even earlier, I am unable to find an account with gender dysphoria in mind. Dorkin, as she was affectionately known to Hirschfeld, by whom she was employed, had previously worked respectively as a baker, an actor and a null and void soldier upon having been effectively ejected from the draft she'd failed to avoid. And finally she found the Institute, where she lived till the Nazis came visiting there. For 14 years, the Institute continued research, during which time it became a kind of refuge for those who were mainly viewed by a public misguidedly inclined to smear them with names undoubtedly crude, most likely with tabloid opinions in mind. How liberating must it have felt to be free to express gender and sexuality in a respectful and safe environment, where trans employees were supplied with passes, an implemented legal requirement allowing them to move among the masses in dress unrestrained by birth, sex, assignment. Lecturers held educational classes relating to matters otherwise outlawed or at the very least roundly ignored. The Institute championed equality for women in a male-dominated age, homosexuality, legality, gender and many more sources of outrage drawn on for the sake of inhumanity by nationalist preachers given centre stage, condemning with furious indignation, the more so in times of hyperinflation. In 1933, when he came to power, Adolf Hitler unleashed a remorseless surge of hatred, which Joseph Goebbels, by now Reich Minister of Propaganda, would merge with hypnotic speeches crowned with a vow of terrible revenge on the Jewish scourge, coupled with the purging of homophile clubs, whose members deserved the severest of drubs. Less than 5 months later, the Institute was raided by students, Nazis to a man, given free rein by the government to loot and destroy like Nazis do because they can, and accompanied by a brass band to boot. The Institute library they overran, every book therein deemed fuel for a fire and ceremoniously thrown on the pyre. Institute employees were, by the SA, manhandled with prejudice in the extreme, and, in accord with the aforesaid vow, they, the survivors, were told they could either team up with Nazi state scientists by way of collaboration or join the endless stream of humanity flowing beyond prison gates to an ocean of expendable inmates. Dora Richter, so I read, hadn't died, but escaped, settling eventually in Czechoslovakia, where she applied successfully for a new identity. Magnus Hirschfeld, temporarily deprived ill fate, having long ago left Germany. He'd been travelling the world all the while, and he died 2 years later, in exile. As for the Nazis, the war, and all the rest, it's a well-documented history. But what of humanity put to the test? Have the lessons received post-victory been all but forgotten, north, south, east and west, by majorities favouring bigotry? Far-right politics, impossibly, is rising again, from what I can see. Populist leaders of hard-right agenda and manifestos beyond the pale are seemingly each a strong contender on many a nationalist campaign trail. Anti-pride and anti-transgender, these authoritarians, should they prevail, their vote base grows daily ever more vast, look set to repeat the mistakes of the past. And Richard Littlejohn is still employed at the Daily Mail, brainwashing millions, in spite of Miss Meadows, whose life was destroyed by the likes of his shallow opinions, ignorant and baselessly paranoid rhetoric fit for fascist dominions, brazenly printed, published and believed by too many readers, too easily deceived. Right, this next one is called The Road to Clacton Pier. I've already put it on before, so you might have already heard it, but I'll just have a swig of tea first. Hang on. The Road to Clacton Pier. I like Great Britain how it used to be, and Nigel Farage has said as much too, so could it be that we are happily, harmoniously of a common view? Alas, no. Nigel, as I understand, is an ultra Tory, Thatcherite man, keen to complete what Thatcher first planned in 79 when her term began. Pray, listen as I attempt to convey my thoughts on the past, present, future UK. Age 17, I lived in a bedsit. A common thing then for someone my age. I lived very well, even saved a fair bit, and all on a modest factory wage when income tax was 33%. I ask you, how many youngsters today can afford to be fully independent? Even 30-year-olds can't move away. Could it be low income taxation don't compensate for privatisation? Seems to me, comparing the past to now, tax cuts haven't bettered life quality unless you live in an ivory tower, a mansion or a gated community, and if over the last 45 years, ever-increasing NHS times, dental fees, rail fares, water rates, rent arrears, debts, mortgage payments, unsolved petty crimes and poverty is anything to go by, Thatcherite merchants have peddled a lie. Which begs the question, what version of GB does Farage want for this once great nation? His manifesto, from what I can see, once immigration's out of the equation, offers nothing but an acceleration of what's been happening since 79, i.e. a methodical disintegration of services that have been in decline for 45 years. And he couldn't care less about Clacton or the NHS. My guess is he wants to implement trusts economics across the board by raising the primary tax levels for us year after year, whilst gradually phasing out the NHS by making it easier to go private, giving the impression we're all better off, life being breezier without the tax burden, not to mention closed borders, net zero immigration, the end of woke and a St George vacation. And when the roads have more potholes than road, people have to work past 75, rivers are still like toilets overflowed, fit for work claimants are barely alive, healthcare's modelled on Trump's USA, no cancer treatment, no elderly care, unless of course you can afford to pay, when infrastructure's in total disrepair, will reform voters finally see through the lies they were told about the EU? I like Great Britain, how it used to be, and Nigel Farage has said so too, but his version isn't my cup of tea. And if Truss's fuck up don't offer a clue, look up the cost of an operation performed in a private establishment. Peep through the borders beyond immigration. You'll see a charlatan, smugly content, laughing like the old clown by Clacton Pier, smoking a Benson and raising a beer.